Welcome to the MOE podcast.
A place where individual stories come to life.
This is how we need to be communicating with people. This is how we support people's personal development.
It's important to speak about people believing in people.
The more you're able to let go of your limitation, the more you step into your power, your inner authentic power.
MOE, a place for me, others, everyone.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the MOE Foundation podcast. I am your host today, so my name's Maisie. You've probably heard a little bit from me at the beginning and end of the other podcasts, but today you're going to hear a little bit more from me. So welcome, and today we're talking to the wonderful Qayyah, or Q as she also likes to be called. She's going to be talking about all sorts of amazing things, and we're going to get right to it, and we're going to kick off with a question. So the question is, if you could describe yourself in 5 words, how would you describe yourself?
Oh my god. In 5 words. I'm counting now. Oh my god. What now? That's not really a description, is it? That's more of an exclamation. In 5 words. Are we using noun modifiers? Nouns?
Anything.
Is there anything that's kind of not allowed? Allowed?
There are no rules.
God. I'm going to go with a very human being.
A very human being.
I'm a very human being. I know there's a repetition there, but
I know.
I like breaking rules.
There
I'm a
are
bit
no
of a rule
rules.
breaker as well. I mean, I think a lot of the time, obviously that question was meant to prompt, tell me a little bit more about yourself and what you do in life. But I think it's such a difficult question to answer because I feel like I'm giving a difficult answer. But I think because I do so much stuff, and that stuff is what I do, it's not what I am. Fundamentally, I am very much just like, no, I'm human. That's all the stuff that I do, but this is me. I like to think that I bring my humanness. I like to humanize myself and other people in what I do. I think that really is essentially, yeah, that's kind of the fundamental of it, really. Like all of the work that I'm doing is, I guess, an attempt to kind of help people remind themselves about different aspects of what it is to be human. A lot of the work that I've done up until now has been very much about cognition and, you know, teaching people things like teaching people languages, teaching people to pole dance, or kind of, I guess, you know, very switched on if you're working in journalism or you're producing voiceovers. You have to have your brain switched on. But we forget that it's also important to have the other facets of us turned on too.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why I've now started veering away into things like, for example, coaching or, training to become a personal trainer. I've now applied to become a yoga teacher too, is because I think we've spoken about this before as well, about this idea around information and sort of, you know, how much we're accruing in our bodies and brains without realizing that, you know, less often is more. And actually, it's really important to have less up in your head so that you can really explore those other facets of what it is to be human. In particular with coaching, things like emotions and the links between, you know, your thoughts and your feelings, and how your emotional intelligence is very strongly linked to your cognitive intelligence. When you're looking at, for example, personal training, you really do study a lot of anatomy, physiology, neurology too, because the nervous system is just so important. It defines who you are, really. And kind of looking at those different forms of intelligence, like I use different examples. So, for example, proprioception, equilibrioception, emotion, vestibular, nociception. The list could just go on, but those are really important parts of our human experience that I think we tend to think our cognition can override when it can't all the time. And being aware of that with metacognition, which is, I guess, what you learn about when you start exploring these different sort of, when you start exploring something like coaching, for example. I've kind of just gone off on one about all sorts of random stuff that probably is making no sense to anyone listening right now. I think essentially what I'm saying is that I've got to a stage in my life where I've done a lot, and I've tried to help other people do a lot, and now I'm kind of like, you can still go and do things, but do it more meaningfully and intentionally, and kind of really narrow down and focus on what it is that you want to do. If that's to do many things, that's fine too, but making sure that it's coming from a place of, oh, actually, this is an opportunity I really like. It gives me my good feels to go and do this. This actually brings me joy. This is what will fulfill me, and create that cycle of doing more and more fulfilling things for myself and other people, rather than doing it from a sense of scarcity of like, I must do this, I have to be good at everything, I have to go and do everything, I've got to get this done, I've got to do, what are your real needs versus your impulses. Can you use your intuition to figure out what those needs are, rather than following what some people might describe as desires or wants that aren't necessarily the things that we do truly want deep down. Yeah, that was a really long-winded way of answering how I would describe myself. Very human being that is clearly not doing very much of the stuff anymore, kind of like calming it down, I guess. I don't know if that made any sense.
It did make a huge amount of sense, and it's kind of given, I think, a really nice overview of where you're at and who you are. So, and we'll go into a little bit more as we progress. So it's really interesting for us hearing from the community, hearing from the MOE community, a little bit about their origins, I suppose, a little bit about what has brought you to where you find yourself right now. Big question.
Ooh, so it's such a big question, because it's kind of like, you have lived your life, here you are at this point in your life now, what brought you here? So I'm 30, for context. I've been on the planet for 30 years, plus if you include gestation. And I think at the moment I'm currently training as a personal trainer. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is quite physical, and it's about helping others to improve their understanding of their own bodies as well. What works for them, what doesn't, because everybody is a different body. And I think I became interested in doing personal training because I was quite interested in the psychological impact that, a separate person can have on her own well-being, because a lot of people see personal trainers and think, oh, they're ripped, they're really strong, but it actually takes quite a lot of emotional and mental resilience to kind of get to that stage. And I think in turn, to be able to help somebody else with that, you really do need coaching skills. People talk about discipline, and you do need a degree of self-discipline, of course, but I think when we talk about disciplining others, often we don't really understand that a lot of it is about coaxing people and coaching people and getting people to inwardly sort of self-reflect about what it is that they truly want, as opposed to sort of hammering things into people's heads and sort of, I often think about some of the things that Bell Hooks wrote in her book All About Love, because we talk about different styles of parenting, for example, where they can be varying in terms of boundaries, varied in terms of affection as well. So you've got these different approaches to parenting, which is kind of, it can be similar to coaching. You can be a coach in terms of how you parent your children. And I think thinking about sort of boundaries and kindness when it comes to helping other people become, inverted commas, the best version of themselves, is a really useful thing to do. And in conjunction with the personal training too, obviously, there are other pursuits that I have many other pursuits that I'm involved in. So obviously I decided to become a coach because I thought it complemented what I was interested in quite a lot. I think it's really important to remember that the psychological, emotional and physiological isn't tied together. It is just one. It's all one and the same thing. And if you don't have that sort of psychological support and structure to ensure that you're able to go and do the things that you want to do with your day, that's the foundation. And it all sort of starts with the emotions and the thoughts that you're having. So yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I was really drawn to Mo. And it was actually a friend who recommended, during a period of what I would describe as adversity, that I go and look at the Mo Foundation and the courses that they offered. And I'm really grateful that I did. Yeah, I don't know if that's not actually very succinct at all, because that was very wordy and I could probably have told you a lot more about how I ended up here. But that's sort of the more recent decision-making process around why I decided to coach.
It's where you're at the moment, and and I think that's a really nice way to begin. I mean, obviously we're sort of releasing this around New Year's, new me's, so that question of how do I show up for myself in a physical and psychological way is really, really interesting. I was really struck actually by something you said about discipline. So I was having a conversation the other day about the word discipline, and language is such an incredible tool for navigating this life, and discipline has, for me, it has some negative connotations, and you kind of went into that with the parenting and the making sure that we do show up for ourselves, and how do we show up for ourselves. I think, what are your thoughts on that word? Because it's a big one in this kind of fitness realm.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. And I think for somebody who, I don't discipline other people, and the word discipline has changed in meaning for me. As someone who's a linguist, I forgot to add in there that obviously I speak a few languages as well. I speak 5 languages. I speak French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese and English, and then I'm also learning bits and bobs of other languages. Wow. So I'm learning Japanese sort of more in a more structured way, and Russian as well. And I was taught to read Fusha Arabic as a kid. I can recite it. I can't understand what the heck is going on the majority of the time, but it sounds nice. And I can also speak some broken Urdu. So I'm not going to bother trying to count them. That was the biggest humble brag ever. Anyway, listen, you've got the skills, and I think linguistics, and oh god, it's a beautiful thing. Well, this is the thing. I think it's a bit of a two-pronged thing that I'm going to say now. So first of all, it took a lot of discipline and focus to go and do that, to go and become proficient in the languages that I have done. But it also, I think it's a marriage of different things. So when people talk about discipline, the second prong to this is that I think as a linguist, I'm really fascinated in the way words become loaded with different meanings, and how actually something that obviously we talk a lot about in coaching is raising self-awareness. If you're self-aware, you'll probably know that you bring to a word your own meanings, you bring your own cognitive biases. You're aware that, for example, I'm trying to think of words that are not too divisive. So for example, if I talk a little bit about my background and the fact that I was raised Muslim, that word brings visual images into my mind of many different things. For many people, they look at me and they sort of go, oh yeah, I can sort of get that she's, so there are some aspects of me there that people would say that they might associate with being Muslim, but they wouldn't necessarily associate being Muslim with being a pole dancer. They don't necessarily know the etymology of the word, which is sort of rooted in, it's a tri-lettered thing, if you want to call it that. So you've got 3 letters in most Arabic words. And the word Muslim literally means someone who surrenders to peace. And our interpretations of whether someone is actually doing that or not, obviously they're hugely subjective. And, you know, someone else might forget, even though they attach that label to themselves, that many of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, unwittingly, we're not necessarily subscribing or surrendering to peace. We sometimes make our lives a little bit more difficult than they need to be. I'm certainly going to hold my hands up freely and say that I've not always made my life as easy or as peaceful as I would have liked it to be. But the same thing applies to the word discipline. So for me, discipline is about, I guess, having faith and courage that you can if you want, or sometimes if you need to, get to a certain stage with something for your own benefit. The physical side of working out for me is just like, you know, I say it's a bonus, but when I say the physical side of it, I'm talking about sort of the muscles, the aesthetic, the kind of, we talk about fitness and kind of agility, mobility, all of these different things. My key thing that I'm thinking about all of the time is my brain health and my mood. Because if I don't exercise discipline with my body, I'm not going to get my chemicals. I'm not going to get my serotonin, my dopamine, my endorphins. And, you know, if someone gives you a pat on the back at the end of your workout, I'm not going to get my oxytocin either. I mean, you know, when you start to explore the sort of the connections between your neurology, your psychology, and your physiology, your ability to, what that word mood actually means, because that can include anything from sort of, we talk about interoception, so the ability to tell when you're hungry, thirsty, angry, sad, grieving, joyous, all of these different things that are internal and impacted by the external, or our ability to kind of manage and regulate. For me, discipline is, it comes from kindness. It has to. And if you're bullying or berating somebody, which I think is the first thing that comes to mind when we think about discipline, we think of like corporal punishment or shouting at people or whatever it is. I think kindness is fundamental to everything that I do. And if somebody says to me, I don't have the energy for this today in a workout, or I don't have the self-discipline to eat foods that are going to make me feel good at the end, because my brain is going, I want a dopamine hit, I want to eat, I want that fast sugary hit, I don't feel good right now. And also, for the record, you know, when you're doing big workouts, sugar's important too. But, you know, like all of these things, what use is it going to be if you say to if you criticize somebody, or if you don't get them to self-reflect and go, you know, could you be kinder to yourself today and give yourself a bit of a break? Or if you feel in a position to, could you do something differently? Could you go and do the workout? If you've not got the energy, what could you do? What's your body telling you to do? Is it telling you to rest and recover? Yeah. You know what's happening inside of your body. You tell me, because I can't tell you.
It's that, that idea of tuning into oneself, and being able to do that with another person there to be your mirror and be your observer, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I think that metacognition, where we start to become aware of our own thinking patterns and aware of our bodily sensations as well, which is, you know, such a great thing if you're interested in yoga, which, you know, it's not confirmed yet, but I have also applied to become a yoga teacher, because it really complements I thought I went into coaching because that complemented the personal training, and then it all sort of became this thing where it was sort of like, actually, these things all, it's not that one complements the other, they all marry together really, really well. And actually, coaching is probably one of the most valuable tools that you can use with anybody, because we're cognitive creatures. We are also very emotional as well, and we have other forms of intelligence. But the way that we communicate often is through language, whether that's, you know, through touch, through eye contact, or through speech. And if you can use the power of speech and your voice, as someone who's also a voiceover artist,
just adding to the many
just
things
adding
that
to
you
the
are,
many
multifaceted.
many list of. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I'm very grateful for it. But I think if you can use your voice to get somebody to hear their own and to hear their own body too, rather than constantly listening outside for what we should be doing, what more can I do? Could you do less? Could you listen to yourself and see what your body's trying to tell you and what your brain's trying to tell you? I think that's sort of the approach that I guess the MOE course gave me, was to really intuit and to continue helping others to learn to intuit as well. Because in the fast-paced society that we live in, which many of us are pushed into unwittingly, and we sort of uphold it and we sustain it and collude in it without realising, when you start to step back from that, you go, oh, actually, what do I want? Maybe I just want to have my cup of tea and
enjoy the birds singing.
Emotionally dissociate for a bit. Or enjoy the birds singing as well. But the body keeps the score. I'm sure you've heard of that book before. You know, it really does. It tells you what it needs.
It's a really beautiful thing that you said about kind of the complementary thing. So yes, you do an awful lot. You're one of these people that, you know, picks it up, and I can't remember the word now, but it is this kind of polymath, is that the word? That has so many things and so many beautiful passions. But I think this, I had a friend who used that term polymath quite a while back, almost disparagingly, because I think they were quite frustrated about this sense of failure to acknowledge privilege, I guess, when we look at all of these different pursuits that, you know, if you actually to list them and you sort of go, you're a pole dance teacher, you tutor languages, you speak 7 of them, you also work in a big media company, you're a translation editor, and now you're a voiceover artist, and now you're doing coaching, and you're also becoming a PT, and you're becoming a yoga teacher, and you used to cook people curry as a side hustle and bake lots of cakes, and you should probably just sit down. It's also important to remember the fact that there is a degree of kind of, I always thought it was privilege that had allowed me to go and do these things, but having previously spoken with me, I think a lot of the time I was very cognitively switched on because I was in fight or flight quite a lot of the time, and very much felt this sense of, I have to do this, I have to be at the top of my game, because otherwise I'm not going to survive. Like, I'm not going to be able to feed myself or support myself or be in a safe space. I'm not going to be okay. It is a wonderful thing, but the multifaceted part of me is also a multifaceted thing in terms of how it came about, which I think is really interesting, because I'm now also trying to step back from doing so much, and it's not, I don't know how well it's working. We'll see. Well, I had the image of sort of the ebbing and flowing of different things, because I'm very similar in the sense that, you know, I do lots and lots of different things, and I think it's giving yourself grace and allowing certain things. I was going to say this about the coaching, so allowing certain things to be a base or a grounding almost. So, you know, the coaching, what you were saying about it just being about language, it's just being about, you know, really communicating with another person. And I think that that's a fascinating thing when you look at it as not necessarily, I am a coach and this is what I do, with the blinkers on. It's something that holds all the other aspects of your life, I suppose.
Yeah, it marries them together, like we were saying earlier. And I think the power of it too, when you were talking about communication, I think when we think about communicating, again, that word is one that has taken on different meanings, as has the word information, because when we're communicating information, but we forget that we're literally made of information. So we talk about the age of information, forgetting that fundamentally, for example, when you're in yoga, you're actually sort of trying to let go of all of the information that your body has taken in and to really listen to whatever information is coming from within it. And we don't define these words very well, I don't think. Communication, when I stop to think now about what most coachees are trying to communicate, a lot of the time they're trying to communicate their experience and just need it to be heard so that they can process it for themselves and make decisions about how they'd like their experience to be of the world and their existence. And I say existence because when we're doing all the time, a lot of the time we do things to distract ourselves from our reality. Not all the time, but I think that was definitely the case for me. It's changed now into a sort of, I am now doing these things because I know that this fulfills me. It, on a fundamental level, this gives me the chemicals that I need to function, but also it comes from a good place because I know I get my chemicals when I see someone else getting their chemicals, because that was something that I couldn't healthily do for a long time. And when I see one of my coachees come to me and say something really vulnerable and uncomfortable and honest that they know they wouldn't like to say in front of someone else, and they say to me, I trust you. I've had so many coaching sessions with, you know, where it's obviously you have to kind of remove your emotions from it to a certain extent. Not remove them, but it's about your coachee, not you. But I do come away from it incredibly moved and just incredibly sort of heartened and optimistic when someone says, I've never trusted anyone before, I trust you. And I sort of go, what is it that makes you trust me? And they sort of go, I'm not really sure right now. And you're going, well, maybe you will be eventually. We can raise your self-awareness, but can you trust yourself? That's the real thing that I'm interested in. It's like, can you trust yourself to look after yourself and to make you the best version of you that you can be? Because that's you.
Sure.
I'm not doing anything.
I mean, it's a beautiful, it's so, I'm just sort of, my brain's pinging with all sorts of information and feelings, and I really resonate with what you're saying. And I think it's a beautiful thing when you see somebody acknowledge, but I think what you're saying there is this kind of self-trust is, it sort of leads us beautifully into this conversation that we've talked about having, was around the kind of the differences between coaching and psychotherapy. So for our listeners out there, I'm currently training to be a psychotherapist, an art psychotherapist, and I've been fascinated by the difference between the two, and me and Qayyah have had some really interesting conversations around that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the podcast. And
part of the reason why I was interested in coaching was, I guess, because I'd started to really explore my own mind. I was, I've been fortunate to have access to psychotherapy after some, we all experience challenges without being toxic about it, but I'd had some challenging experiences without sort of dismissing my own experiences. And I have been in psychotherapy for quite some time. And I'm quite open about it because, we all experience difficulties, and I think that's a good reason to be open about things that other people might be struggling with. The differences between psychotherapy and coaching for me are quite stark, because coaching is a very goal-focused thing, or it's forward-facing rather. So you're helping somebody to create structure for themselves in terms of how they're setting themselves up to create this forward-moving thing that is not devoid of hurdles. So there is a degree of, problem solving involved there, and like, how can you work around this, and do so in a way that feels like motivating, just from a very chemical and psychological perspective as well. There is, of course, there's some degree of like psychology that's working into this, but it's not the same as psychotherapy, because psychotherapy is very much around, I guess, it is all about the present moment now, but they're facing in different directions. And it's not like mentoring either, because with mentoring, that's very much somebody soliciting some very specific help and advice from you, I guess, or guidance on how you've managed to do a particular thing. If I were to mentor somebody in voiceover work, for example, I would be saying, this is what I did to learn to do this, or this is what I did to learn to do that. you could go and do that too. If I were counselling somebody, I'd say, I am advising you to do this, which is very direct. You're seeking out counsel, which is where, you know, unsolicited advice comes from, because if you get counselling, it's solicited. But with psychotherapy, I think you're still exploring your mind, but I think it's really important to remember that coaching is not a substitute for psychotherapy, and vice versa. You know, psychotherapy, maybe it is about going and achieving goals. I've never had that experience before. For me, psychotherapy was about exploring my past to understand how it had brought me to my present, and what to do to manage that, or to change that, or to accept it. And there's still a degree of, can I change my behaviours or my responses to things based on what I've learnt thus far? And I think coaching is very much about, what are you doing right now in relation to the things that you're telling me that you would like to achieve in the future, or that you would like to stop, I guess. What would you like to be different?
It did.
Did that
I
answer
mean,
your
it's
question?
really, really interesting, because I, as you were speaking, I was just remembering, actually, when I was doing my coaching course with Mo, I remember sitting and I did a little diagram, because I was trying to work it out in my own mind. I was going, okay, so coaching is this, and I'm working out what coaching is by doing this course, and therapy is this, and where's the line, and what's the difference, and how do you kind of navigate which one, because is coaching kind of it, and I think what I ended up doing was, and it was very, very similar to what you just explained, which is this present moment being the middle, and then you're either looking back or you're looking forwards. I think with coaching, it's interesting to touch on the past, because, you know, our past informs our present, like you were saying right at the beginning of this podcast. Like it's who we are. It's what we are right now, is a sort of an accumulation of what's happened to us thus far. But yeah, it's touching on, and then it's bringing it back to, okay, and now how do we move forward with that information? It's not digging, it's not kind of working it out, or I don't know. It's a fascinating one. It's really fascinating, and we could probably spend the whole podcast talking just about this.
I mean, we could. It's fascinating because obviously, as somebody who still gets coached and still receives psychotherapy, and I say who gets coached, who's coached by people who don't necessarily realise that they're coaching them. And I think obviously I'm more consciously coached as well. You see a difference in kind of the approaches that are there, and I guess there's a slight difference in terms of, you know, safeguarding as well, because there is a really big safety aspect to exploring someone's past. As soon as you start peeling back the layers of your past to try and establish a narrative of how you got to where you have done, I think it's a really complex question to answer, because, you know, I've coached some people who are suddenly becoming more aware of themselves, and then going, for example, I might need to access therapy, and I'm going,
probably,
yeah, that might be the case, and this isn't the space for that. I'm not qualified for that, just so that we're clear. That's not me saying that I'm not wanting to support you in a therapeutic sense, but I might raise your awareness in one area in a way that's, you know, not detrimental to you, but that you might need extra support with, from somebody who really has spent a long time understanding those very complex dynamics between the mind and the actual, you know, the mind, brain, body kind of thing. And as somebody who's been through a lot of difficult experiences, I have been told that I am very good at empathizing with people, sometimes too much so, to the detriment of myself. But that's not, in my mind, a substitute for having somebody really guide and support you through delving through your past, so that you can establish a narrative that is continued and how you might like to change it. I think it's important to make sure that I think we talked about toxic positivity as well. That has been something that I've been really conscious of avoiding in coaching. And it is important when somebody brings up something difficult to hold space for it and to go, to just listen and to let that person run with it, I think. But also to kind of know when it's veering into a space, to know intuitively in your body where you're sort of going, how am I emotionally feeling right now? Am I concerned for this person in terms of their mental health? Because, and even that term, when we think about mental health, it's still such a tricky conversation talking about mental health without... I think most of us will experience mental ill health at some point in our lives, unless we're very, very lucky and privileged. I think privileged is probably a better way of putting it. The systems that we're up against and, the structures, when you look at intergenerational things too, it's very difficult to avoid. Trauma. Trauma. But it does really impact people. And I think, I think there's a degree to which I think the coaching course really helped in my awareness of knowing when something was veering on. I'm concerned, do I veer this in another direction? Do I maybe add to our goals that you work towards finding a therapist that might be suitable for you? And I continue coaching you, but you have that added extra support there to make sure that you have what you need, and that it's not just coming from one person or even your friends who can't support you in that necessarily. We could talk about this forever. I'm going to try and shut up about it.
It's really, really fascinating what you're saying. And they're all kind of questions that I've had in my own mind. And as I go down the journey and learn more about the difference, it's just there's so many little bits of information that I could pick up on there. But I think it's allowing space for someone to explore. But knowing, not only your limits, but as you sort of rightly touched on, intuitively knowing their limits, and knowing what you can do to help and what you might need to signpost, I think is a really, really healthy thing. The word boundaries comes to mind.
And I think as somebody who, I'm very open about the fact that I didn't learn healthy boundaries from quite a young age, and it's very difficult when you've not known how certain dynamics should work to intuitively kind of, like, you really have to have your wits about you. You need to be very observant, I think. And I think I was probably quite a perceptive and observant child in the midst of, and we all experience some degree of chaos, but I think having to learn that through meeting lots of different people and just sort of, and this is why I say that I'm a people person, because I like meeting people to learn about them and watch them and sort of go, oh, well, there's this thing that this person excels at and is really good at. How can I learn from what they're doing? Or there's someone who's really struggling with something and it looks really difficult for them. How can I learn from them to avoid that? And knowing when to help someone and when someone isn't asking for help too.
Really, really big
is
one,
really important as well.
It's I think my trainer is kind of ringing in my mind actually, and I'm thinking, how far do you want to go, and how far am I willing to go? Because your client, your coachee, your whoever, friend even, will only go as far as you kind of, it's a two-way thing. It's go back to that conversation and that duality of minds, isn't it? Of we'll go to where we want to. And
I always think about when I was receiving my training about the section that we covered on limiting self-beliefs as well.
Yeah.
Because those come up a lot when someone's struggling with something. be like, I can't do this, or I just don't want to, or this, that, and the other. And knowing how to challenge that without invalidating what that person is experiencing in that moment. If you sort of say to somebody, you said that you couldn't do X, Y, or Z, and you've just come into a session telling me about how you've, I don't know, run 100 meters further than you said that you were going to run originally, even though you didn't actually say that you were going to do that originally. You said you weren't going to do it because you couldn't. I'm not saying that what you're saying is untrue. I'm saying, is it 100% true? And is it 100% true in the future? Do you know that you're not going to be able to do that? And how does it feel if you're not going to be able to do that? Are you that bothered about it? Do you really want to be able to do it? I'm not making you do it. Like, tell me how you feel about it? Really? Like, visualize it in your mind. What does it look like being able to do that? Is it too daunting right now? Is it something that excites you? Does it get you going? Really exploring those emotions and sort of, as we talked about before, that chemical thing in our body, and really learning to sort of go, what am I feeling in my body when that person tells me to visualize that thing? Do I feel a bit like, oh God, I don't know, that's not for me? And even if that's the case, what is it that's causing that? Do I feel like I'm not good enough to do that? Is it that? Or is it just that maybe that's not the thing for me? Maybe I don't want to be a fishmonger. I want to be a cake baker. I don't know. Like, different things speak to different people for whatever reason. We're all different. We're not designed to all, we're not evolved to all want the same things. And our nature and our nurturing, or, lack thereof in certain areas, will guide, in a very sort of intertwined way, our likes, our dislikes, what we do want, what we don't want. It's about really learning what that means for us, I think.
Again, tuning in to what we want and what we need and what our body craves. I mean, I'm fascinated because I suppose this is a bit of self-disclosure, but I've been qualified as a coach for a long time now. I say long time, 2020, wasn't that long ago, feels like a lifetime ago.
Hey, it's a while.
And I've had clients along the way, and someone asked me recently, oh, so, are you coaching? And it was a fascinating question, because I sort of said, well, I've never really, I want to say, hit the ground running with it. And I think it goes back to what we were saying of doing the work yourself and putting yourself first, and I'm going to sort of touch on the toxic positivity and not be like, oh, you've got to be great all the time. It's really learning every aspect of yourself so that you can trust yourself. And I think I communicated this to the person that had asked, and I said, I've needed to find my anchoring in order to really show up for somebody else. And that's taken some time. Yeah. And it's a work in progress, it's a lifetime thing to continue showing up for yourself and feeling your body and trusting yourself and things like that. But I mean, as I say, the sort of toxic positivity of everything is fine and everything is great. No,
it doesn't serve you in coaching. No, it doesn't. And I think it doesn't serve you in being. I look at myself on a day-to-day basis, and we talk about sort of other people outside. You have to be real about these things. They're not always going to be as self-aware, even if you hope or expect them to be, as we might like for them to be. And people do difficult things, and I say difficult because it's very easy to, a lot of the things that are coming to my mind are things where people might use expletives rather than saying the word difficult, or they might use a very extreme word like horrible or mean or evil, like really, really negative language. And I think remembering that a lot of difficult behaviours are really people trying to survive, trying to meet unmet needs, in ways that often don't work for them, that can be self-sabotaging and alienating, and treating that with kindness, not lack of boundaries, but I guess kindness and a degree of understanding, and sort of going, well, I have to set a boundary there. I'm not necessarily going to tolerate that kind of behaviour. So, for example, if somebody, verbally assaults you in the street, but understanding that that really does come from a place of that person believing that they're not enough or feeling threatened, because we're mammals. We have fight or flight or freeze or fawn responses. That's why we do difficult things, because they're impulsive. Our impulses served us very well. And, when we were sort of developing limbic systems and kind of, we are actually this is why I mentioned that book to you by Daniel Goleman, about emotional intelligence. Before we developed this really complex cognition and this capacity for metacognition, which can be raised in something like coaching or in psychotherapy, before all of that came, we were emotional creatures. It's what helped us survive. When I feel threatened, I'm going to step back, or I'm going to say, no, keep out of my territory, don't do that. Or I might play dead, or whatever it might be. Or I might be like, I might fawn. I might try and placate the person so that they feel safe, so that I feel safe. And you see this play out in so many different situations. If you are able to step back and observe people a bit more, rather than react to them when they do something difficult. I think coaching has served me personally quite well on that front, and that anchoring thing that you were talking about, knowing when to, almost like a balancing scale or a tipping scale, I don't know what the term for it is, holding yourself and the other, because obviously we do have an experience as individuals, and then we've got this idea that we're part of a collective, a community that we serve, and that we want to be involved in to kind of prop us up and to lift us up. Making sure that you kind of keep that in balance is, I guess, crucial. It's fundamental to making sure that you're able to nourish yourself and to nourish other people too. Yeah, I think it makes complete sense that you're sort of like, well, no, I've taken my time. I needed that. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
And I suppose it goes back to that, when people do challenge, it raises questions within yourself. And if someone doesn't ask the questions, you're almost walking around with your eyes shut, because you're just doing what you've always done. You've not been, asked why you're doing it. You're not, there's no reasoning.
I really love in the coaching course that we've learned as well. My neighbours maybe making some noise. I can't hear them. You're okay. You can hear them in the background. Okay, but you will do in a minute. So I guess the thing that I find quite interesting with the course that we did too, with the MOE coaching course, we learn to ask what is prompting something rather than why, because it can feel really judgmental, and just stopping to think about how we ask questions, and why we ask the questions that we do, thinking about ourselves, like, why are we asking this person this question? What's making us want to know this piece of information? What is making me want to comment on what someone else is doing? Is it relevant? Is that suggestion useful? Do they need that? Probably not.
And sometimes probably yes. Sometimes it feels, it's finding, again, the balance, like you've just really beautifully put it. It's how do you keep the equilibrium whilst slowly coaxing what needs to be coaxed out? It's delicate. I want to call it a delicate operation, being with other people. And I think we don't give ourselves enough credit to examine that very often. So we've touched on a little bit about kind of who you are, where you've come from, and you obviously mentioned that you're Muslim. There's been other things that I know about you, but I'd be really interested, as a kind of explorative exercise, to hear your thoughts on, I suppose, intersectionality in coaching. So first of all, for our listeners that don't know what intersectionality is, maybe you could give a bit of a brief overview. And just I'd love for us to explore that a little bit.
So I think That's my tummy making sounds for me. That's not me thinking out loud. I think it's a really interesting thing to sort of. It goes back to what we were saying before about thinking about what different words mean. Yeah. Because for a long time for me, I was too Muslim and never Muslim enough. No matter what I did. The same applied for, my race as well. So I was too brown, never brown enough. Yeah. Too white, never white enough. And the same applied to my gender too. I was too much of a girl and then too manly. I talk about quite a lot of my experiences as a young person growing up, being perceived as mixed race, being perceived as brown, sometimes white, sometimes, as I say, not enough of one thing, too much of another. And for me, when we talk about intersectionality, we have to understand that people are complex and that the psychosocial conditioning that happens to an individual when they are complex and they do have these different intersecting facets of them, like being a brown person perceived as a woman who's perceived as brown but then isn't also perceived as brown, who's perceived as white, or who's not perceived as either, or who's perceived as both, and who doesn't really get much of a say or much agency over their own experience. It can be challenging, and it does have long-lasting consequences. From a very young age, I understood that I was perceived differently in a predominantly white, cis, het space. And I knew that I was different. And I think at times I took pride in it, but only because if I hadn't taken pride in it, I would have crumbled. Yeah. Because I was being bullied quite a lot of the time. And I often used to own, I would not advocate for this now, but I would own the fact that, for example, your young children would be sort of, I experienced a lot of racist transmisogyny where I was likened to a man because of the way that I didn't look like a traditional white woman would look, or sort of, I say traditional, I mean a Eurocentrically, conventionally attractive white female person. Yeah. Like it was all quite, there was this sense of you're a man because you're hairy and because you're brown. And at times, I think I was very much like, yeah, I am a man. Come at me, small boy, and try and fight with me. Not a proponent of this anymore. Please don't fight with people. I was a small child and I was very much kind of like, well, yeah, if you're going to try me. if you're going to make out like, why don't you test it? And I don't recommend that. But I think a lot of these difficult experiences that I had, I didn't know that they would sort of unwittingly lead me to a place later in life where, because I never felt like enough in any way and always felt like too much in other aspects, I felt like I was too much for my family and for my friends, and I really hid behind this mask, I guess, where I would pretend to be okay, and I was very bubbly, very kind of outgoing and lively and very happy, very people-pleasy, because that's what keeps, this is why we talk about toxic positivity too. Some people are very uncomfortable sitting with emotional pain. And when you sit with yours, that can be really uncomfortable for them too. So I learned very quickly not to do that. And, after 9/11 happened, I think that sort of became very amplified. It was like somebody had turned up the volume on, we don't want you here. Yeah. You're not welcome here. And then when I tried to sort of like go and talk to people about those difficult experiences I was having, there was very physical, emotional sensations in my body of, I feel in danger, I'm being rejected, and I can't control this. I can't control how I look. I can't control how I'm perceived. Yeah. And it's putting me in danger. other people felt uncomfortable about it, and it would create different sorts of volatility there. So I talk about intersectionality because I think it's important in a coaching capacity to really make space for the very complex experiences people have. I have people who come to me who are queer, who experience racist abuse and really difficult things that we have to kind of understand and make space for. And even if you don't understand somebody's experience, so for example, I don't know what it's like to have a very visible physical disability, but knowing that I don't understand can still help me to make space for something and to go, well, how is it for you? I'm here to really try and listen to that and to try and sit in your shoes. There might be things that I miss, and I'm going to try and hold myself accountable and to sort of like really think about what that experience might be like so that I can make space for yours. Because that's, for example, if I'm coaching somebody, that's why you're here in front of me. And I think being able to do that has only come from a place of not having had that and not being seen, because we talk about what it is to see someone.
Yeah.
And we talk about what it is to be awake or woke. A lot of it is about being emotionally awake and really sort of hearing that emotion that's happening in someone's body, even though you can't live what they've lived. You can't walk in their shoes, but you can still go, I hear you. That's a really powerful phrase that we use in coaching. I do actually hear you. I see you. That's what I'm here for. I'm not here to take, like explosive emotional outbursts, but yeah, I hear how painful that is. I hear that pain. I hear that discomfort. And that's a really challenging thing to deal with. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
And it's, that's your obstacle, because sometimes people will bring up obstacles that are stopping them from going and achieving the things that they want to achieve. And I really do think it's important to have not just a cognitive, but an emotional understanding of what it is that someone might be going through. If anything, because we don't necessarily understand someone's individual experience, it's actually using our emotions to try and empathize with how that might feel that allow us to get to the core of the most important part of understanding that person anyway, which is just understanding the emotional side of it and how that feels, rather than going, oh, okay, well, I know in my head I can visualize being in that position. It's about feeling it and sort of going, right, okay, what could this person do to leverage that difficult emotion and experience into something that protects them, or that elevates them, or that gets them to where they want to go, to where they deserve to go. There are certain things that I guess I have to be careful about what I say, but off the back of being bullied, and sort of not being able to talk about those really difficult experiences, I had a number of difficult life experiences as a young person. I did I ended up not being able to tell the difference between a friend and a predator. And I think that's probably quite a delicate and diplomatic way of putting it. And I didn't know that I had already developed post-traumatic stress and was really struggling with understanding my emotions, because I'd not been given the opportunity to do that. I hadn't been given the opportunity to cultivate emotional intelligence. I had to have my brain switched on all the time to survive. And I ended up, for a long time without anywhere safe to go. So I was intermittently homeless from when I was 18, which was really difficult. I think part of the reason why I talk about intersectionality and coaching full stop really is because people will go through those difficult things. I'm not going to be able to stop that from happening, but if I can either help someone through it or help someone avoid it if they can, by being resourceful and using that resilience, though we shouldn't have to have that. I think that's what I always say. I don't like the fact that I've had to be strong, but I'm grateful that I had the ability to do that rather than to crumble in the face of some really difficult things. You know, it's important to understand intersectionality if you're trying to, I think if you're trying to be a good human, that's the way I'd put it. I think if you're trying to be a good person, understand what intersectionality is. Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, it's what I'm hearing is, it's extremely complex. We are complex human beings. We have all of these things that make us who we are, and it's not just. It's sometimes not even about our experience, is it? And this is the kind of difference with the intersectionality, is that it's our culture. It's how society perceives our culture. It's these layers upon layers upon layers of things that actually are almost out of our control.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you do have to relinquish control after a certain point, because, on the way back here to do this podcast, I was sat next to somebody and she was reading something that I would describe as sort of quite bigoted potentially, and quite, I'm trying not to be nosy, but your eyes wander. Yeah. And it was literally just propaganda pitting Christian people against Muslim people, basically just saying, and the Quran says this, that God is divisive, and that, he's going to smite Christians, and just loads of weird stuff that I was just kind of like, oh my God, this is, oh. And then I checked myself and I thought I could say something because this is making me feel uncomfortable. And she'd actually elbowed me as I sat down, and was sort of like, she had her elbow like in my face. And I thought, right, okay, after she opened that book, and it just felt like a really sort of, what's the word? Like a not very subtle kind of message that was saying, like, get out of my space. And I thought, I'm just going to sit here and be calm and be comfortable, because this is my space to sit down on the tube as well. Like, I'm not going to be made uncomfortable by this. I'm not going to engage with it, because my energy is better used elsewhere. It's better used in doing something positive. I'm not here to change someone's mind about me. I'm not here to control how they perceive me. And I really hope that they can gain some clarity and self-awareness to explore why it is that they're not exploring their own cognitive biases, which is just a really fundamental thing. If you're not able to critically think, you're going to struggle. And it's not my job to help everyone with all of their struggles. It's my job to make sure that I'm a good resource for those who actually really want to learn about themselves. And you have to maintain. I think me from maybe like 10 years ago would have been really, I guess I would have probably gone into fight or flight from something like that, because it feels really threatening and frightening. But that is exactly the nature of that's the purpose of these things. It's to create divide and to create fear and hatred and sow seeds of doubt. Like, that's where, we get scared when we feel threatened by things, and then we react aggressively. And then if we leave it to fester, it becomes hatred or depression, or just, it sits in the body and it's not good for us. Like, there are scientific papers to prove that you shouldn't let anger sit in you. You have to forgive people, because it's better for you. If you sit with that anger in your body, it will make you sick. That's why we talk about somatic work as well. If you leave that stress and that anger stored in the body, it will make you unwell. The bitterness, the rage, it just makes you so unwell. And I do think that it just sort of, you have to accept that you don't have control over how society is conditioned to think. It's about, and about how it's conditioned not to be self-aware, and about how it's not. What you can do is, in your small circle, help people become more self-aware and, and to explore themselves, and do the same for yourself too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing that it's a rebellious act to work on yourself. And
it's radical. It's a radical act of self-care, but also care for others when we stop to really reflect on how it is that we think and react to a situation, and in turn how we can't control the way that others treat us. And what we can do is create boundaries and barriers for self-protection where we do need to do that, because sometimes that is necessary. It is important to, you mentioned boundaries earlier, it is really important to make sure that you're protecting yourself from things that are going to leave you feeling negative and incapacitated from making that really positive change that I think most people can make in their own small way, that has actually got a huge sort of butterfly effect a lot of the time, that people aren't aware of.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful. I think it really, a lot of what we're sort of talking about here, and it really resonates with a lot of what Darren, the founder of MOE, would sort of preach to me when I was lost and confused. And you know, his voice and his legacy really does kind of live on in the work that we do in the conversations that we have, because you know, his ethos was, you know, do it and ask permission later, living a life less ordinary. It's that kind of aliveness with being that, yeah, I think keeping it all in mind and being there for another is just, yeah, rebellious, and we like it.
I believe that people persist even when they're not here in the form that they were. You know, I do genuinely believe that the things that you do, that you leave behind, how you were and what you fundamentally were externally to the people around you, you leave an imprint. It's why we remember. Humans have evolved to remember. There's a reason why. And there's a reason why you remember him. And I think that is, it's an incredibly powerful thing that he's done by setting up that ripple effect to go and carry on.
Well, definitely. Now I know that we've been talking for a while. I think we got to. I'm trying to think of somewhere else that we might go, but I'm also really aware of time, and that if we start a conversation, we might end up here for hours and hours. So right. I think it's a really beautiful place to leave it, but I just would like to say thank you so much. If there's anything that you would like to share with the rest of the community, then please, this is your space to do so.
I think the only thing that I would say is that anyone who's actually signed on to the course and who's already trained, you know, you've already done a brilliant thing just by doing it. And anyone who's thinking about it, obviously, I would always recommend MOE to do the course with, because I know a lot of people become coaches with other organisations, but I think there's something quite special about the MOE Foundation and the people within it. And I think expressing gratitude to the people who trained me, and you know, being able to sort of, you know, having been given something that I can now go and give back to others who really need it and who want it and who need that support it's been a really invaluable tool. And I'm just really happy to be able to do that. It's very rewarding for me as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I will leave all of your details and some of the references of things that we've spoken about in this episode in the blurb, in the little text that you get with the podcast. So yeah, if you'd like to get in touch with Q, then yeah, please do. We love people connecting.
That'd be lovely. I know, I love people connecting with me.
See you.
See you soon. Bye.
Now, I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed having that conversation, and I hope that it's brought some really amazing, valuable insights for the rest of our community. So if you would like to get in touch with us and be on the MOE podcast, perhaps you want to have a chat with me, perhaps you want to have a chat with Alex and share your story, then we would absolutely love to have you. So you can do that by getting in touch with one of the team. If you'd like to get in touch with me, then that's Maisie at moefoundation.com. So MAISIE at moefoundation.com. And we look forward to both hearing from you and seeing you on the next episode. Bye for now. Now, this is a message for anybody who thinks that life coaching might be the right calling for you, but you're not sure how to attract new clients. So on the 17th of April, we will be having our next Mo Digital Academy. Keely Vuong White, the founder of Qayyah Coaching, is going to be talking to us about how to attract clients as a new life coach, a 90-minute long introduction to marketing. Now, she's had a fantastic life and has spent 15 years in international corporate marketing and has also learned a thing or two about setting up a business. And she's also done her coaching with the MOE Foundation. So she's going to be running a fantastic workshop. We hope to see you there. If you're interested and you'd like to register, then please find more information on our website. That's moefoundation.com/calendar. Thanks so much, and we will see you there.